And we're back now with the Roundtable. I'm joined by Bill Kristol, editor of the Weekly Standard, David Remnick, editor of the New Yorker, Peggy Noonan from the Wall Street Journal, and Tavis Smiley from PBS, and a host of other things. But let's begin with this news breaking over the weekend and Sergeant Bo Bergdahl coming home. Bill Kristol, I have to tell you, I've been surprised at the vehemence of the criticism coming out after this announcement.
I've been impressed by the courage, actually, of the Republicans who are willing to criticize what is, I think, an unfortunate deal made by the President of the United States. Obviously, everyone's happy to have Sergeant Bergdahl back, and therefore it takes some political courage, I think, to say, wait a second, let's look at the long-term national interest of the country. Let's not just say, as Susan Rice said twice, it's a joyous occasion. I was very struck by that. She didn't say what normally the President, I'd say, of a country that has to make a really difficult and unfortunate decision like this says, which is, we hated having to do this. We know we don't want to set a precedent, but in this case, we made a very reluctantly made a decision. They're just spinning this as if it's a wonderful day for America. Is it really?
I think that's a fair point in terms of the rhetoric, but I guess, David Remnick, the question is, what is the alternative? Senator Cruz said there was another way to get him home.
Well, I think, look, it's a joyous occasion that he's coming home, but it's an ambivalent occasion overall, and you have to acknowledge that. But what Mike Rogers says seems to me absolutely wrong. After all, what would those mollycoddling, terrorist-friendly Israelis do? The Israelis have released prisoners that they know to have killed people, their own people, on any number of occasions, for the reason of bringing home their own, for political reasons, for humanitarian reasons. So the idea that this is somehow unprecedented in the history of the West is just wrong. But I think you have to acknowledge that you're releasing people that are bad actors, killers in some instances, and that has to be acknowledged. This war's coming to an end, thank God. What were we supposed to do? Leave our American soldier in the custody of the Taliban? What was the alternative?
Complicated, Peggy Noonan, because Ambassador Rice says there are assurances there that these Taliban are not going to return to the battlefield, but can't specify what they are.
Yeah, and we're just not sure what will happen. It is hard to keep people who have been hardened terrorists and professionals and high up in their organization. It's probably going to be quite a job to make sure they don't go back to mischief. This, I think, is the cloud that comes on this story. There's the beautiful light of the fact that this young man, an American soldier, is coming home. But there is also this sense that if you are trading 5 known bad guys, terrorists, for the soldier, you have just told terrorists in the world and the Taliban, we can tell you now how to get your people out of Gitmo. It's take an American soldier.
I'm glad Peggy raises Gitmo, because this is the one conversation that is not on the table as yet. Like everybody else on this round table, I certainly celebrate the fact that Sergeant Bergdahl is coming home. But it underscores the fact that halfway through President Obama's second term, this campaign promise has not been kept. Gitmo is still open. And for those Americans who care about human rights and civil rights and the rule of law, the fact that we still have this place open where this prisoner swap could be made in the first place is a conversation we have to have. So we can debate prisoner swaps and whether or not that makes sense as the basis of foreign policy into the weeks to come. But there ought not to be a debate about whether Gitmo ought to still be open.
And probably more than half the detainees at Gitmo are relatively low level, but there are some high level detainees as well, and that would raise all the questions that we're seeing now in Qatar as well. I do want to move down to the big news at the end of the week. The VA, Eric Shinseki resigns. The president accepts his resignation with reluctance, he said. And Peggy, I was struck by your column on Friday. You said this is a sign of the president's laxity in leadership, and you says it encourages, I hadn't seen this word before, a slobocracy. What is that?
A slobocracy is what you get when you have a huge, sprawling, intense, deep, wide federal government, and you do not have managers slapping it into shape each day. Being a visionary is a good job, making speeches is a good job, but you actually, if you are an executive, and the president's the chief executive, have to be trying to slap this thing into shape each day. The VA scandal is systemic. I mean, I think that's very clear. It's not new. It's been going on for years, but it has worsened in the past 3 or 4 years. Somebody should have been on the case. I was very struck by Mr. Shinseki questioning the integrity, essentially, of the information he'd been given as head of the VA. I think that tells you that there there are cultural problems with regard to what you tell the boss.
David Remnick, one of your columnists made the point that he should have stuck with Shinseki.
Well, let's remember, Eric Shinseki is a guy who's won 3 Bronze Stars, a Purple Heart, lost most of his foot in battle. His integrity and devotion to this country is not in question. What's in question is his rule over the VA, whether it was effective or not, at a time when thousands and thousands of veterans are coming home from, thank God, from Afghanistan and Iraq. That this bureaucracy has done a terrible job and that it's been ruled in a way that is completely ineffective is an outrage to the veterans themselves. A change was needed. But it is a tragic thing to see a guy like Eric Shinseki have to walk out the door with a degree of shame.
But I think, David, though, that we're talking about the symptom and not the problem. And I'm concerned that if we don't get the diagnosis right, we won't get the prognosis right. The bottom line, Peggy, is that this problem has become acutely worse, in part because we have engaged in more wars. When you engage in more wars, you're going to have more veterans. And the more veterans come home and they are reliant upon a system that is dysfunctional, that doesn't have the capacity to support them, to give them what they need, you can change the Secretary of Veterans Affairs every 6 months. But the more wars, the more veterans, and if the system isn't equipped to deal with their needs, this problem is going to continue and get worse still.
But
more veterans have come back and they've gone to college. And how have they gone to college? They got the GI Bill. And you know what? There's no crisis of veterans getting into college. The VA is flawed because it's a failed big government bureaucracy. You can't fire anyone. It's gotten more money each year under President Obama. Its rate of increase of funding has gone up faster than the number of people they're serving. The VA needs to be fundamentally reformed. And one way it could be reformed is to, in fact, let people take a voucher and go to a hospital, the same hospitals we all go to, instead of having to go to the VA to get special services.
I'm not saying it shouldn't be reformed.
I want to fundamentally reform the VA and reduce it. Privatize, yeah, just like we do the GI Bill. Do you think there needs to be a veterans university? And furthermore, I would keep some centers of excellence for research on special things that affect veterans, some centers of treatment. That's fine. There is no need for a huge veterans administration hospital.
I'm not suggesting there ought not to be reform, but privatization bill is not the answer to everything. And the fact of the matter is there are veterans coming home who are falling into poverty more and more every day. It is shameful the way we treat our veterans. Here's the real problem. The problem is this issue becomes significant for us when veterans don't get the health care they need. And we want to play politics with this, but there are millions of Americans every day who are being failed by a healthcare system that Republicans want to repeal every bit of progress we are making to serve everyday people, whether they're veterans or not.
If they got a generous voucher to use to purchase the health insurance they need or the health care they need, how would that be failing veterans?
Well,
we're going to have to take a break right there in that silence.